This video is a compilation of some of the most destroyed engines and engine parts that I've come across in the 15 years as a cat diesel truck engine mechanic. Many of these clips can also be found in my Destruction of the Week segment that are found in my normal uploaded videos. Enjoy. To start out, we have this lovely C13 air compressor, which obviously had a piston rod failure here and threw it out the side of the air compressor block. Now the problem with this is that since it locked up and threw that out of the side of the block, it also damaged the gear train, which is extremely expensive. This is the cam gear here on a C13, and these are almost impossible to get off of the camshafts. Probably going to need a new camshaft, also through metal throughout the entire engine. Pretty bad. Speaking of pretty bad, we have this C15 turbocharger, which I would say a little bit out of specification here. The compressor wheel here is completely destroyed. Turbo's going to need to be replaced. Probably the most interesting thing of this, though, was the oil supply line. When I pulled the oil line off of the turbocharger, I found a penny there. Now, that's either very intelligent or very not intelligent. If the driver had put the penny there after the failure of the turbocharger, he probably prevented almost all of his engine oil being poured out of the exhaust side of this turbo. Now, if he'd put the penny before the failure, though, that would have been the direct cause of the failure. Now, sticking with the 3400 series cat engine, we have a C27, which is basically a 12-cylinder version of the 3406. Now, it has 2-cylinder heads, it has 12 cylinders, but that was nothing to do with the problem on this one. This one actually, and I've never seen this before or after, stripped all of the teeth off of the oil pump gear. I've never seen this. I'm not exactly sure how this happened, but really did a number on this engine. There was so much metal in this engine, you could only imagine, needed to be completely rebuilt. Speaking of oil pumps, whenever you have a 3126 or C7 oil pan off, always check the idler gear. That's because they tend to fail. And you don't want it to look like the other oil pump we just looked like. Now, this one is quite interesting. This is the most recent video clip I have. This is from a C13, and obviously this has problems. Butt connectors in the wiring harness, and the oil looks like mayonnaise. The oil looking like mayonnaise is obviously a bigger problem, though, than the butt connectors in the wiring harness. And the cause of this was quite interesting. Never seen this before. And what it was actually a broken head bolt. But it's not just that the head bolt broke, it's that the bolt head of the head bolt was gone. It was just popped off. As you can see, that should be where the head bolt head is. The head bolt shaft is still there, but the bolt head was laying next to it under the valve cover. Not sure exactly why this happened, though. What it was causing, though, was since it deloaded the head gasket in this area, it was pushing coolant up around the head bolt shaft. You can see what a normal head bolt looks like on a C13, and then you can see our friend the broken head bolt. Was able to extract it, but we did need to remove the cylinder head and check what damage had been done to the engine. This engine needed a lot of work. For one thing, it has a broken exhaust fastener in the cylinder head. That's not good. The coolant looked like lime or lemon jello. Not sure what the heck's going on there. Maybe they put some stop leak in it or something. Camshaft, the lobes are scratched, going to need replaced on that, possibly due to the condition of the oil. But the worst thing I found was the rod and the main bearings. The rod bearings particularly were the worst rod bearings I've ever seen on an engine outside of one that has actually spun a rod bearing. These had gone through so many layers of the bearing material, it wasn't even funny. Now, our next series of clips is actually a story, and the story starts with the oil filter element. And as you can see, it is full of metal flakes, and that's always a bad sign. But the story behind this oil filter is that it spun a main bearing. And the main bearing, when it spins, obviously damages the crankshaft, damages the engine block and the bearing itself, and generally wipes out the adjacent rod bearings. But the reason this main spun was because of this picture, which was actually taken a couple weeks before the main bearing spun. This is oil filter element, and this came out of the main oil gallery. And the way it got into the main oil gallery was because of this Donaldson oil filter had basically imploded. It collapsed in on itself, and it forced the oil filter element into the oil gallery. You can see a better picture of the filter here. The customer opted to replace the filter with a cat filter and try to fish all the particles out from the main oil gallery. We suggested complete block disassembly and cleaning, but they tried to go the other route and ended up with a spun main bearing, unfortunately. Now, our next series of clips are basically going to be rapid-fire one-liners. So, think you got a cooling system problem? Think your engine has a little bit high on the blow-by scale? Might want to have that looked at. Not exactly sure why your engine is smoking so much white smoke? That could be a problem. Not exactly sure what that loud popping noise was coming out of the intake. That's going to be expensive to fix. For our next clip here, we have an equipment side problem, and I found this particularly interesting because this hydraulic cylinder is enormous. That was a 2x4. The steel shaft on this was about 4 inches wide. Not sure exactly how they bent this, but it must have taken a tremendous amount of force. Now, the next one is particularly disgusting. This is a heater hose going into the heater core here. Had a massive oil cooler failure and apparently kept driving it for quite a while. This is the coolant passage around your cylinder liners in the cylinder block. It is the nastiest I've ever seen. Just total oil in the cooling system. This was what drained out of the radiator. You can see not much coolant in there. This is what the oil cooler looked like when we actually removed it, so obviously had a big problem. This is what came out of the water pump when we pulled the water pump. Now the next one is what happens on C15 Acert engines was the IVA bolts would break, and it would break in half the Jake IVA housings. It would break in half rocker arms and rocker arm shafts and the bolts. The bolts would break off in the head. Not a good time. For our final clip, we have a C9 industrial engine here. And this particular one, the customer said they changed the fuel filters and then it would not start after the fact. Well, I'm not going to say that changing the fuel filters didn't cause this, but it probably didn't. You can see the valve sticking out of the bottom of the head there. Engine obviously needed completely rebuilt. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching.